I've always been a massive fan of the countless abilities and powers across all of anime, so much in fact that I recently made an entire video dedicated to making my very own power system. This video actually ended up doing well enough that tons of people were asking me to make a story for this system, and although it's a bit out of my wheelhouse, I decided to just go for it and see what I could come up with. This story is heavily based on the original power system video, so if you haven't watched it, I'd highly advise you go and check it out, so I'll put a link in the description for you to do that. But if you're not trying to watch the whole thing, I'll give you a quick summary before I jump into the actual story. For everyone that knows the system though, I'll throw up a timestamp on screen that you can skip to if you'd like to jump straight into it, but there's a few things that I want to change from the original video, so I advise you stick around for this part. Anyways, if you don't already know how the system works, basically every power in this world is summon based. That means that you can't just levitate someone with your mind or breathe out fire, rather you need to summon a physical item that can then be used to form special abilities. These summons are called constructs, and they're the result of users tapping into the power of the 7 gods of reality known as the totems. To access the power of these totems, one must have a seal, which is a circular marking that acts as a gateway to wield the totem's powers. Now with that said, there's one thing I wanted to change up with the seals from the last video to make a little more sense. I previously said that seal size and placement matters very much, like a small seal on the palm is much better for creating little trinkets, while a massive seal on one's back is much stronger and useful for wide-scale constructs. And while that is still true to a degree, I realized that placing too much emphasis on one's seal size and location inhibits a lot of really cool aspects about this system. Specifically, seals on arms and hands are super cool, and if size is such an important factor, then it wouldn't make much sense for people to get seals on those areas of their body when they could get a much bigger one somewhere else on their body. That's why I'm toning down the importance of seal size and location. Not that it's not important at all, but this way it's just much more versatile. A massive seal can be better at releasing more power at first, but with this new system, as long as the seal is clearly visible and you can easily make it out on someone's body, as long as you're capable of utilizing your seal's powers effectively, the seal size has much less impact on the strength that you can access from it. Don't get me wrong, I am still a big fan of the previous seal system, but I just realized that strong characters become so much harder to make when trying to use more than just seals on the chest and back, so I think that this is a much better fit. Now hopefully that clears things up a bit, so let me do a quick breakdown on the specific totems just to catch everyone up. So like I said, there's 7 totems, with the first on the roster being Avishkar the Totem of Eternity, which is a totem very hard to utilize the power of as he controls elements of time. Practitioners of Avishkar are usually only dedicated to him as his powers are quite hard to use. Then there's Dormir, the Totem of Creation, who's used by all kinds of people from making everyday tools and trinkets to large Iron Man style suits and equipment, a very versatile power. There's also Akins, the Totem of Freedom who focuses on movement and being able to go, see, or find whatever it is that you're looking for without restriction, commonly used amongst travelers, fighters, and explorers alike. Varth is the Totem of Presence, and excels in roguelike constructs as well as bolstering one's own aura, as his powers let users manipulate the presence/aura of themselves and their constructs. Then there's Genesis the Totem of Life, excelling in nature-related constructs as well as healing, and similar to Avishkar, many users of Genesis are solo worshippers of her because she's also very difficult to use. Then there's Aegis, the Totem of Protection, specializing in shields, barriers, your common defense style powers. And finally we have Maelstrom, the Totem of Destruction. He's the totem with the most raw power, but also the most dangerous to use as his power can be quite unruly, so it's a balance that users have to walk between power output and control. Now the way to actually gain strength and power with these abilities is through spiritual connection and physical training, so there's a lot of religious aspects in this world that tie directly into a user's strength. That's about as much as I can explain while still trying to keep this system brief and not just repeating the other video in full, so with that said, I think that we can finally get into the real story of this world. In the land of Valera, what we know in the real world as magic, mysticism, or perhaps even sorcery is commonplace amongst society. We may use cars to get around or irrigation systems to water our plants, but here you'll see people riding through the streets on magical beasts or farmers summoning rain clouds to harvest their crops. Perhaps you might even notice food vendors making sweet treats that dissipate after you eat them, satisfying your cravings without the nasty side effects. In this world, people use totem constructs for a multitude of different things. Everywhere you look, someone specializes in something different. You have soldiers clad in glowing yellow armor, travelers wearing sky blue winged boots, and healers with green gloves and pendants. This world might seem to be classic medieval fantasy at first, but when looking closer into the details, you can see how the power of constructs have created a much more advanced civilization. Think Black Clover's fantasy vibe mixed with the more technologically advanced aspects of Fullmetal Alchemist. Now as for Valera itself, the world is full of lush forests, deserts, plains, snow-capped mountains, all kinds of different regions. This is why there's such a large amount of diversity in totem use across the world. Each region uses and values specific totems' powers more than the other based on their culture, environment, and history. Now across the entire land of Valera, the largest region and where our story takes place is known as Ishel, a place where people from all walks of life come to experience life to the fullest and fulfill their dreams and ambitions. Aside from just being the largest region, Ishel is known for having a relatively well-mannered population, wonderful cities, but also heavy militaristic force with Imperial guards being given far too much power. Overall though, many people can look past those elements of corruption because Ishel's capital city is the hub for so much of society. But to get to know our main characters a bit, we have to focus in on an area not as crowded as the city. The capital was a place of brilliance, towering walls, endless markets, and opportunity for anyone who chased it. But on the outskirts, away from all the politics and noise, lived a small orphanage where two boys grew up together, Thoma Caines and Draven Stark. They didn't know their parents, but it didn't matter. They were brothers. Thoma was the bright-eyed boy filled with optimism. He longed for adventure, was brimming with curiosity, and brought a smile to everyone's face. Draven on the other hand was sharper, colder, and slower to trust. But as their bond grew, Thoma's warm nature rubbed off on him. For all his doubts about the world, the one person that Draven could always rely on was Thoma. One day, when the orphans were practicing praying to their totems, two Imperial guards arrived, hunting a criminal, and they mistook one of the caretakers for their target. These men were new, inexperienced, and when the caretaker resisted, they panicked. In desperation, one unleashed Maelstrom's power, but lost control. The explosion ripped through the orphanage, swallowing everything in fire and dust. Draven had anticipated the explosion, and right before they were hit by the blast, he had flipped a table to shield himself and Thoma. And when the dust had settled and the boys rose, they realized that they were the only two alive amongst a room of corpses. Thoma could barely even breathe. Everyone that he had ever known was gone in an instant. But near the doorway, one of the guards was still twitching, clinging to whatever fragile life that he had left. Draven marched over. He didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. He brought his fist down, again and again, until the man's face was nothing but the blood on his hands. Thoma stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. He wanted to tell Draven to stop, but he just couldn't get the words out. Draven turned to him and he said, "None of this would have happened if we were in control. Those filthy Imperials, their leaders, it's all their fault. And it won't stop here. Not unless we end it. Together, we can make sure that this never happens again. We'll get stronger, we'll take power, and when we're ready, we'll kill them all." He extended his bloody hand, but Thoma couldn't move. He couldn't take it, and in that silence, Draven understood. He'd have to walk this path alone. Draven left that day, and the boy Thoma once called his brother was gone. He knew a flip had switched in Draven. In his place, something remained much darker, a heart buried under rage, and the need for control. Some years had passed after that incident, with Thoma and Draven having set off on completely different paths. Unsure of what Draven might become, Thoma knew that one day he might have to put a stop to the very man that he once called family. And with that in mind, Thoma set out on a trip throughout the entire world of Valeria to learn about the power of the totems from all across the world. He knew he couldn't find everything by staying in Ishel, as every region worshipped different totems and used their power in unique ways, and he wanted to learn. He traveled throughout snowy mountains, learning to use Dormir to keep himself alive in the harsh environments, Akins to move freely through dense jungles, Aegis to protect himself from blasts of rock in the harsh desert, and all other kinds of things. By the end of his journey, Thoma had gotten tattoos of every single totem. This was incredibly taboo though, as the more you spread out your connection between the totems, the less output you can have from each of them, and many considered that using all 7 was just a waste of time. But throughout his travels, he prayed consistently, trained harder than anyone, and used those years to gain what he thought was enough power to rival any obstacle the world would throw at him, Draven, or even something else entirely. He was ready. And with that said, I think it's time I explain a little bit more about what Thoma actually looks like, since he is the main character after all. At this point, Thoma would be returning from his multi-year adventure across the world, and I'd say that he's probably in his early 20s. I love anime, but I am so sick of how every character has to be a 15-year-old. So Thoma's a real adult, okay? He's a pretty average height guy with a nice muscular frame. He has shaggy brown hair that goes down to about his ears and a red cloth bandana that wraps around his forehead, which has clearly seen years of use, but also well loved and patched up for many hardships that it's faced. He also has a thick faded red choker that goes around his neck. With all his travels, he was in the sun quite a lot and developed a pretty decent tan. He's seen wearing a long sleeve sage green shirt rolled up to just below his elbows and some cloth wraps around his wrists as well as some baggy cargo pants with an older fantasy flair that tuck into his classic brown boots. For the most part, Thoma just looks like a regular hardworking strong guy, but his tattoos are really what makes him so special. On each palm he has a seal of Dormir, each forearm a seal of Aegis, his shoulders for Vareth, Akins above his ankles, Genesis on his chest, Maelstrom between his shoulder blades, and finally Avishkar's seal placed in the center of his forehead, although it's covered up by his bandana as he doesn't want to come off as intimidating. While it doesn't really provide extra value, Thoma has also gotten tattoos of lines that connect every seal on his body, essentially turning him into a circuit board of seals that really embodies that spirit of becoming the strongest conduit. Thoma enjoys becoming stronger and wants to become the strongest, not just for the sake of having to defeat Draven if he must, but he also just has a strong sense of pride for becoming the greatest construct user of all time. When Thoma uses his power, each of his seals light up in their respective colors, and if he's using multiple at the same time to combine constructs, you can see the lines on his body light up with a glowing aura that mix together to create a dancing light show on Thoma's body. Now during Thoma's long adventure, he met all kinds of people, from amazing instructors to bottom of the barrel scammers. Thoma had seen it all. However, when traveling through the land of eternal winter known as the Frost, and later the never-ending heatwave named Cyrus, Thoma met two distinct individuals to join him on his travels, the first of these two being Luca Soloman, the man of the Frost. Luca's a bit taller and lankier than Thoma, with more pale features due to his cold environment. He has shorter white hair with streaks of silver and sports a short sleeve off-white tee with bits of fur lining the sleeve's edges. He also has a silver and gold pendant that falls just below his clavicles that seems to resemble the shape of a shield buckler. Luca also wears light blue medieval style pants that taper off into a more form-fitting section at his legs and tuck into his reinforced leather boots, which also have bits of fur peeking out the top as well as the fur along the waistline of his pants. To hold up these pants in place of a belt, Luca has a silver chain that runs through the loops. As for his tattoos, he bears Genesis on his palms and Aegis on the top of his hands, with another seal of Genesis covering his chest and stomach and a massive full back piece of Aegis. You might think that being from such a cold environment, Luca would be a little heavier dressed, and he actually is, just not in the traditional sense. Instead of common coats and gloves, Luca uses Aegis to create clothing that shelters himself from the cold air. As for his personality, he's generally pretty lighthearted, but has an ironclad will to protect those who can't protect themselves, and is extremely grateful to Aegis and Genesis for lending him the power to help those in need. Thoma had run into Luca when traveling across the Frost to learn about how people deal with the cold environment and what totems they use to do so, and there he discovered Luca, who was extremely skilled in defense. After hearing Thoma's story about Draven and his mission to learn all he can to become the strongest construct user, and especially being the line of defense if Draven do ever endanger the public, Luca decided to join Thoma on his adventure to help out in whatever way he could. Flash forward to the two reaching the desert lands of Cyrus, where they picked up their third party member, Amara Kalder. Amara is a woman with an athletic build and brown skin due to the constant sun and harsh living conditions of the desert. Her hair is black and worn down in two strands separated in the front and accented by red bands. She rocks a red cloth crop top with leather reinforcement to add some extra support, as well as golden metallic arm bracers and some cloth wrapped around her biceps. She has these baggy red cloth pants to avoid overheating in the hot sun that end at her knees as they tuck into a set of leather knee guards. On her feet she also has some sandals that are tightly secured with a selection of golden straps. She's also covered in accessories, sporting a silver ring on each finger with a few different gems and stones almost acting as brass knuckles, as well as some golden and red gem necklaces and a flowing belt made out of cloth along with a few small leather compartments on her waist for storing little trinkets. As for her seals, Amara's stomach is covered in a large seal of Maelstrom, Akins on her calves and hands, and finally Varth on her elbows. She's not afraid to show off her seals as they're what give her purpose, and even something like Maelstrom, which is more taboo, isn't something that Amara wants to hide. Similar to when Thoma met Luca, the two are wandering through the desert and having a pretty hard time adjusting to the environment, until they met Amara, who taught them how to use their totems more efficiently in the desert climate. She was a hunter who used her totems to create all kinds of weapons to fit the scenario, like maybe an electric bow that when shot tracks the target, as well as Akins to create boots or gear to help her speed around. As much as she loved her community in the desert despite its hardships, Amara had always wanted to explore what else is out there, and when she learned that these two were on the mission to become the strongest by traveling the world, she was in. And so they set off, finishing their journey across all of Valera right back where Thomas had started in Ishil. But when they got there, something was clearly different. At the time of Thoma's departure, Ishil was suffocating under the Empire's grip. Imperial guards in every corner, roadside checkpoints, and nobles strutting high above the common folk. The city was still full of prosperity and those who wanted to make a name for themselves, but it was far from perfect. When he returned though, the capital felt different. The streets were lively, merchants called from their stalls without fear, children darted through the alleyways without soldiers barking at them. There were fighters here and there, mercenaries and watchmen too, but no imperial guards in sight. The nobles who had once ruled the city from their balconies were conspicuously absent. Thoma couldn't even tell if the old king still lived. And then, the horn sounded. A deep note rolled across the city like thunder, freezing the group of three in place. Instinct told them it was attack, but the people didn't panic. They smiled, even cheered, as they turned toward the grand marble steps of the capital. Thoma followed their gaze, and there, standing framed in the sun, was the man he once called brother, Draven. Only he was no longer the lean and secluded boy that Thoma remembered. He stood broader now, shoulders heavy with strength. His black hair was cropped neatly, his beard and mustache trimmed to classy perfection. A crisp white t-shirt tucked into his dark trousers, suspenders running along his chest draped almost like gun holsters. Alone, he could have passed as a commoner, but the details told another story. A long blue coat with embroidered regal patterns draped over his shoulders. Gloves of polished leather, lined with gold and clasped tightly around his hands, with his sleeves tucked deliberately into them as to not show an inch of skin. His every layer felt intentional, as if he was concealing something beneath his veneer of respectability. Thoma's heart was twisted. He felt relief that his brother had lived, but horror because he now ruled. And then, the crowd erupted, not in cries of Draven, but in chants of a name that made Thoma's stomach drop. Thoma Caines. Not for him, but for the king. And for the first time, it all snapped into place. After the explosion at the orphanage, stories had spread of the two boys who'd survived, Draven and Thoma. But here, before all of Ishal, Draven had claimed Thoma's name, his identity. The real Thoma Caines had been twisted into a villain in the people's eyes, a deserter, a traitor, a shadow of the king that they adored. Draven had played it perfectly. He'd risen through politics as a gentle reformer, tore down the old regime, and gathered the masses to his side. And with one stolen name, he'd erased his brother from history. Thoma's chest tightened as he stared up at the Capitol steps, emotions colliding, betrayal, disbelief, anger, and sorrow. Then Draven found his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the crowd fell away. Nothing existed but the two of them, bound by their past and divided by everything else. And in that silent exchange, Thoma knew that their lives, their past, the very future of Ishal, and all of Valera for that matter, had just changed forever. And that's all I've got. I really wanted to try my hand at something new and create a story, but a manga or actual series just really isn't possible for me right now, so I wanted to try and do something that would essentially be the story of the first few chapters or episodes of an actual series. Honestly, I won't lie, I felt a lot more confident in making the system itself as opposed to the story, so let me know how it turned out. I think it could definitely still use some work, but I'm unsure what I'd even change. Overall though, I'm pretty happy with the world that I created. Anyways, if y'all enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos to come. I did enjoy writing the story, but making actual powers feels more like my wheelhouse, so I think in my next video I'm going to try and do some more actual power based stuff. But let me know what y'all want to see in the comments. Alright, that's enough yapping from me though, so I hope y'all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!